Okay, this week I'm sharing you a topic that for me is on my 2022 list of topics that I really want to go deeper and learn more about. And it's called the Big Five Factor Model. So it's the one that is really the most scientifically proven, based, approved. I'm not sure which word to use here, but to help us understand and bring more self-awareness to who we are. So I reached out to Mary Kempnich, who we geek out on human behavior, and it's not even funny. But today I really wanted to bring our conversation on the Big Five Factor Model, on what are these five elements that define our personality. And once we bring self-awareness, then we can actually do something about it. Now, let's go to my interview with her. Mary, thank you so much for accepting my invitation. I've been dying to get more insight and learn more about our topic today.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
So before we dive deep, and we could talk about it, and we started talking about it before recording about this topic, we spoke about it the other day. Before we get there, could you take a moment and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Mary, and I'm a psychologist. So I've got a PhD in social and evolutionary psychology, and I'm still at the university as a lecturer, teaching a broad range of subjects, and also as a researcher, with my expertise being both in social networks, so that's our relationships to friends and family, and also more recently adding mindfulness to that. And on top of this, I use all the gathered knowledge and wisdom as a mindset mentor for high achievers, where I work one-on-one and in groups with people, helping them to excel blissfully so that over the course of our lifetime, we can continue to aim higher and actually enjoy the process.
I love it. And I love it that we also serve the same type of individual, high achievers, intellectual, very cerebral. So we're going to bring a topic today that we both know that is super important, because we know more and more how mindset is an important one. And a component of mindset is also self-awareness. So I reached out because I wanted us to talk about the Big Five Factor Model. So if you could you first explain what is that?
Yeah, of course. So we have a natural desire to understand ourselves and others, right? Just to make sense of the world. Our brain is a sort of like pattern detection machine, which just helps us to understand what's what in a daily situation. Personality is a really interesting facet of that mechanism, because if we understand ourselves better and if we understand other people based on some things we can measure and we can repeat and we can sort of make sure are stable and consistent over time, that gives us a massive edge, not only in how we interact with others in the world, but also in understanding our own thoughts, our own behaviors a little bit better, and our own feelings, so that we can navigate them and kind of play to our strength. And so, yeah.
And the Big Fat Factor Model is the only one that is scientifically proven in terms of personality test.
Yeah, so proven is a bit of a tricky term, because we never have 100% accuracy like we might do in physics or something. But Myers-Briggs is the one that people usually get to grips with the personality traits at first. And it's a really fun tool. And I know it's used a lot within human resources. But that is not really scientifically validated at all. That's sort of based on Carl Jung, who had great ideas, and it's a very fun thing to explore. But it's not something that within the scientific realm we actually use, because it's not necessarily reliable, and it's based on some assumptions and premises that don't really hold up to scientific scrutiny. Whereas the Big Five model was a massive attempt to basically look at all the ways we describe people and kind of see what are the overarching themes. So what sort of factors come out? If we look at all the traits we can come up with, and if we measure them in several different ways, what are the themes that keep coming up again and again? And it turns out to be those five. And so they are very well researched, and they've been applied in many different areas. And we never know, there might be more around the corner, but for now, that seems to be a pretty stable model for what the average person kind of is made up of.
Yeah. So can you tell us what are the fives?
Yeah, so the first one, I think this is the most popular one that everyone's talked about before, is extroversion. And we can say introversion is the opposite of it, but actually within this model, we're just talking about high and low. So low extroversion would be the equivalent of being introverted. And I'm saying this is the one most people know about because that's the one that most people seem to talk about, like in a wider context within society. And with all of those 5, sometimes there's an inherent perception of whether it is good or bad to score a certain way. And I always like to take a step back and just look at what they actually mean before we're sort of deducing, like, is this a good or a bad trait to have? And so extroversion, in a nutshell, can be understood as a sort of, if you score high, as an assertiveness and as a sort of going out into the world to be social, but also a strong desire for stimulation. So we enjoy sort of stimulation that's rewarding to us if we score high in extroversion. Another one that is, I think, kind of understood inherently is openness. And so openness means just both in terms of intellectual openness, so curiosity, sort of intrigue in playing around with different ideas, also with opinions that might not reflect our own, but it can also be wider in terms of an openness to experience. So how willing are we to try out something that's novel to us? In addition, there's agreeableness, which I think is also kind of easy to understand. So if you're really into being sociable, harmony is very important to you, then that might be a sort of a hint that you're scoring high in agreeableness. Then there's conscientiousness, which is often overlooked, but is one of the major determinants of success. So if we score high in conscientiousness, that means we have a large sense of duty, and we're really eager to make sure we get all the details right. And we're actually going to perform at a high level because of that kind of focus on getting the things done and being very responsible with whatever task we've been given. And then last but not least, and this gets a bit of a bad rap, is neuroticism. Yes. So when we hear someone is neurotic, we normally don't associate that with something we would love to be. It's the only one, funnily enough, that when we're scoring them is scored in a way where the higher you score, the less favorable we see it in a society. So in some ways, if you're ever doing a test online, sometimes they do it as emotional stability. So that's sort of the flip side of it. Kind of means the same thing. And as I said, there's good and bad things about scoring high or low. But what it means is basically that there's a large amplitude of emotions that you are, like, there's a big range of emotions that you can explore and that you are sort of experiencing on a daily basis. And that can be a destabilizing force, but that can also open up yourself to a whole realm of possibilities that maybe might not be interesting to someone scoring low on neuroticism, because those people might be quite content within more of a narrow band of experiences in their life.
Oh, so much, because I did my test recently. I've known about the Big Five for a while, and I actually did the test this week, and the result was what I knew. In terms of neuroticism, I score pretty high, which, yes, it can, when you see it at first, you're like, my gosh, like, this is not a good thing. But when you become aware of it and you look at the flip side, that is what makes me a great coach.
Exactly.
Because
so in terms of, yes, and in terms of relating to experiences at the extreme of the emotional scale, it's an absolute asset, because you will actually know truly what it feels like to be in either of those states. And you also, if the lows are lower, the highs might also be higher for you. So you might have a unique ability to really enjoy something and really get a massive kick out of something that other people might just look at you and be like, oh, really? You've been biting into this donut and it gives you this much pleasure? And you're like, yes, it does. So that's definitely not a bad thing to score high on neuroticism.
Yes. And if you would ask my kids, they're like, yeah, our mom's like 4 years old some days, because I can get excited for the smallest things.
Yeah. That's part of it. And this is also, so impulsivity comes into it, which again, normally we tend to just be so quick to judge and we see it as something negative. But impulsivity can also be beautiful if you have a creative urge, if you have an idea in the middle of a group and the mood is kind of down and you come up with a spark that reignites sort of the fire in the community, that can be a precious gift.
Definitely. Oh, yes. And again, it's like, once we become aware of it, then I can actually do something with it. I can leverage it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So extroversion, openness.
Yes. agreeableness,
I can't say that one.
conscientiousness, and neuroticism. Yes.
Consciousness.
You know what? You can remember, like, so this is a nice way to remember them. The word ocean is the first letters of all of them. So it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism.
I'll remember that. I'll definitely remember that. And I have to say, and I'd like to see how can we use it as a business, but I use it with my clients. So when I see that a client, for example, is very high in being agreeable, I cannot say that word in English somehow.
That's fine.
And who's very high on that, and who just wants to, get along with everybody, then I understand that that's the person who will tend to put their clients first, who will forget themselves, who will do, what the other person wants to do, sometimes maybe at the detriment of themselves, or, saying, hey, wouldn't that be a better option? They won't want to confront. So again, there's no good or bad. It's just to bring some awareness in there.
Yeah. So I'd say the challenge for people who score high in agreeableness is very often boundaries, because the desire for harmony and for the social dynamics to be a really positive experience for every member, they often put themselves last, and they will do what's best for the group, but not necessarily what's best for them, or what's sort of aligned with a sustainable long-term vision of that dynamic in mind.
And I see so many entrepreneurs in that one.
But again, it's also a great gift, because you're so attuned. Altruism, you score really high on altruism if you're agreeable, right? So you have the whole idea of a heart-centered entrepreneur. Most of them will score high in agreeableness because there's just like a genuine desire to be of service, and that's again a beautiful thing. So it's just knowing, know thyself. That's always, awareness is always step one. then you know a lot more already.
So let's say the entrepreneurs that are listening to us, how can they use the ocean, the big five, for themselves and within their business, for their business? How can this become a business tool?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 steps involved. The first one is actually figuring out how you score, and there's lots of ways to do this for free online. You just sort of Google Big Five inventory. There's some that are better validated than others, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find a great one. So the first place is kind of, what's your set point? Like, what is your personality right now at this moment in time? Now, the second point that I would add, and this is somewhat of a novel idea within the industry, and within psychological research as well, is that it is not as fixed as we think. So very often we believe that once we have a certain personality, and there is a large genetic component, and there's a lot about early nurturing and the environment that we grew up in, of course. However, we have a little bit of wiggle room there. And as soon as we understand where we are, we also have the unique opportunity to observe ourselves if certain behaviors, if certain feelings and certain thoughts in relationship to our personality traits come up, and we can modify them over time. So a very powerful exercise is to become aware of your personality type. And it's not, I think type, again, I'd be cautious with that word, but with how you score on each individual scale. So become aware of that, and then utilize that to shape your image of yourself and your identity, your understanding of who you are. And that allows you to tweak them over time, right? So you don't have to be stuck with scoring low in openness and then think, well, that's it, I'm never going to look at anything else again because I know I'm not open. If you tell yourself that, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, as we know. But if you're saying, right, okay, I'm scoring low in openness, that means I might not be that open to new ideas. So let's watch it. If I'm talking to someone else in my private life, in my professional life, whether it's a client, whether it's an employee, whoever that might be, am I noticing myself closing myself up to a new idea? Someone's coming to me, is like, hey, why don't we do this? Or have you heard about that? Or I know your viewpoint is this, but I've read this really interesting article that's arguing the other way. Do you immediately shut it down? If so, fine, notice. And you have a choice. You can then be like, well, that's me scoring low in openness. What do you want? It is what it is. That's perfectly valid. That's fine. And it might actually be helpful in understanding your own reactions much, much better. Or you can say, well, wait a second. What would it look like if I was opening myself a tad, like a teeny tiny bit? Let's just read it. I'm going to read it skeptically, and I'm convinced I won't like it, but I'm going to read it and take a little step towards a new direction. So that to me is a second step that's really going to benefit you, because it's going above and beyond understanding, it's then playing with it and actively manipulating variables. This is how we'd say it in a scientific context, to look at how the outcome is affected. And ultimately, we can actually maneuver ourselves into a self-identity that's more suitable to how we would like to show up in the world, right? And then step number 3, when you were asking about as an entrepreneur, so whether you have clients or whether you have employees and or clients, it can be a really helpful tool in terms of your leadership as well. So I don't know how familiar you are with the theory X and theory Y in terms of motivation and how we tend to be motivated, by McGregor. I think there's a paper from 1960, if I'm not mistaken. There's basically 2 ideas, and one is that theory X, that in order to make people do something, you've got to sort of micromanage them. And the second you're looking away, they're not going to do it. They're not intrinsically motivated. So they need you to extrinsically, as either as their boss, but also as their coach, if you're in that industry, they need you to have your eyes on them. That's how they're motivated. That's one theory, really popular back in the 80s. And that's still, you know, that's still a way that a lot of people operate, and that's fine, that's okay. And then theory Y is more based on intrinsic motivation, and thinking that both my clients and my employees, actually, they are intrinsically lit up, like something inside of them is deeply desiring to contribute in one way or another and to move themselves forward. And the best thing that I can be is a sort of safe container for them to blossom. So I have to make sure the structure is there. I have to make sure the framework is there. I have to make sure they're feeling safe and they're feeling important and they know they have my trust. And then I kind of let them be. And then occasionally I'll check in, but it's not so much me watching over them, making them do it with a sort of like metaphorical whip, but it's rather me leaning back and trusting that they know what they want, both the client, both in the employee. And there's an interesting paper that's looking at how personality types kind of predict what sort of boss or manager you're likely to be. And if you tend to score high on neuroticism and low on all other 4s, you tend to be more inclined to go with the I need to externally motivate everyone approach, right? So you seem to believe like it is it's kind of my obligation, and it's also my responsibility to make sure people are working.
And is that like a control as well, like a more
exactly? So again, there's more favorable and like not so favorable ways of interpreting it. So it can be great if you require a leader in uncertain times, like throughout this whole pandemic, for instance. There's so much uncertainty. People sometimes really love it, and they sometimes really like to have someone who's like, this is what you're going to do today, I'm going to check in with you, and they are grateful that someone's taking that over for them and that they don't have to self-motivate, because there's tangible outcomes that they have to deliver all the time. A lot of reporting, you know, it's a lot of with the clients. If you do Voxer support or something like that, if you keep asking them like, check in once a day, tell me how it's going, how's it going, some clients love that, absolutely love that. For others, that would really turn them off, and they would just like nothing more than not to be asked. And so if you score lower neuroticism and high in the other 4, you tend to favor an approach where you're sort of a little bit more hands-off, and where it's more of a bottom-up approach, where you are open and receptive towards receiving input from both your clients and employees. So your employee might come up to you and say, hey, I've been looking at the process of how we're doing this. Actually, I feel like we could do it more efficiently. I thought about something. So if you're in the former category, you're going to be like, when did you think about this? When did you have time to do this? Why would you mess with my system? I know what's best. Like, apparently you're not working hard enough. You can sit around, come up with a new system.
You have some spare time in your hands.
Exactly. That's one approach. And in some high pressure contexts where there's deliverables and it's tight and there's deadlines, that might well be justified. Whereas in the second case, you might be like, oh my God, great. Like, tell me, what's the process? And you're open and you're listening. So it can be quite helpful if you are an entrepreneur to also understand your personality in relation to how you're operating with your clients and with your employees, and to take that as a sort of like magnifying glass moment and looking at maybe you are sort of mismatched. So maybe you're working with someone who loves one approach and you're giving them the other. At which point you've got a couple of choices to make, right? Can you adapt? Do you want to adapt? Do you want to try out something else? Do you want to have a conversation about it? Do you feel like it's incompatible? Any of those options are fine, but it's really helpful to just sit down for a second and reflect and look at what actually is the case.
And you put it in like in terms of people on your team, but also clients.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I just had a flash. Yes, like I do have like to have this communication with the clients of like, hey, you know, how are things going? And when I have clients who are like completely hands off, and I'm always like, but like, are we doing? Are we? And okay, now I just had a flash of the type of clients that I work better with versus.
Exactly. So when we describe our dream client, we often like it's funny, it's a deductive way to figure out your personality type. Really, if you're describing your ideal client, that's going to give you an indication of what you like to have as a working dynamic, and that's going to reflect on like your personality type, right? And it's flexible, so it might be that at a certain point in your career you actually love the sort of checking in because it makes you feel, so a lot of it is based on like you rather than the client, right? It makes you feel productive because you know you've checked in today, so you've done something in the client relationship and you're providing value and you're making sure they're reaching the results, you're doing all you can. There's beauty in that, right? Because there's again with the agreeableness, there's a deep desire to be helpful, and there's an inner drive to make sure the other person gets to where they need to. So often we see in the early days, that's where coaches seem to focus. And also, if you're outside of the coaching industry and you have a business, initially when you start hiring people, you're going to hire like this, just because you're used to it all being you. All of a sudden you have this like extended arm and you're not quite sure it can function on its own, so you're going to make sure you tell each finger how to move, right? So this is normal for the beginning. But then normally as we mature and as our personality matures, there's beautiful research that personality keeps maturing over our lifespan. We can refine it, and we can then maybe take more of a lean back approach and be helpful, be more helpful even than we dare to believe.
I love this. There's so many like ding, 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 like that went on as you were talking. I'm like, okay, yes. And somehow, I don't know why, like self-awareness is something that we seem to have lost.
Mm-hmm.
And once we bring it back, that's where the magic begins. Yeah. Because we get behavior, we get strategies that actually are aligned with who we are.
Yeah. And you know, I think it's twofold. On the one hand, I think we get a little scared to look at ourselves, because if you actually take a look at the reality, not at some illusion or some foggy image that we're looking at for a second and then looking away, very often initially there's a little bit of pain associated with it, because we see a discrepancy between what we long to be and what we feel like we currently are. So it's painful. The whole self-awareness process normally is painful. And then also we often have taught ourselves this belief that I really do not resonate with, of like fake it till you make it. And then you have to portray yourself in a certain way that may or may not actually be in line with who you are. Mm-hmm. Coming back to the beginning where I said that extroversion is often perceived as something that we should all aspire towards, and introversion somehow sets us up for failure. There is some research that does suggest it. There's also research, and there's countless individuals that show us that that's not true. So if we strive towards an image of what we think society wants us to be, and we're coming at it with this idea of I've just got to pretend, then it's even more dangerous to cultivate self-awareness, because this pain that I talked about, when we look at the discrepancy between what we think we should and what we actually are, it becomes even more painful to look at it, so we don't look at it. And we might tell ourselves narratives like, oh, I am this way, and then we leave it at that. And that's fine, and that gets you far. You can run with this and you can be super successful with this. But normally if the self-awareness isn't part of your journey, the more successful you get, the kind of more disillusioned you're going to become with serial success. And that's something that, so the clients I work with, that's sort of what they're committed to not letting happen. That the higher you go and the more milestones you reach and the more mind-blowing accomplishments you actually get to, often then the reward or the feelings of deep satisfaction and happiness become smaller and smaller and smaller. And self-awareness is a total game changer in that. Even though it's a little painful at first, but you know, it's a short-time sting over long-time happiness.
So much true. Oh my gosh, I don't think we could finish on a better note than that one, because yes, that is true. It's a long-term game, and bringing that self-awareness of oh, so I do have a tendency of, and I do have a tendency of, allows us to recalibrate
Yeah.
what we do, what we say to ourselves, what we say to others, how we act. So it's such a beautiful gift to give to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Mary, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you online? Because you are filled with insight that's so like deep, not just
Yeah.
fluffy stuff. It's very deep. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so for the last couple of years, I've purely been working like word of mouth, and I kind of love that. So for now, you can just find me on Facebook or on Instagram, just add me. I'm slowly becoming a little bit more visible because I feel like more people long to have these like kind of conversations, and so starting to have them more publicly now.
I like the openness that's coming up.
Yeah, exactly. And that, that's a big piece for all of us. And I think, again, coming back to our current climate and the world we live in, there's so much uncertainty. Everything's in the air at once. And that's the biggest opportunity for shifting rapidly that we've ever had. So, it's crazy. It's scary. And also, if you're open, things can happen like that. And that's the kind of amazing part about it.
Definitely. That's where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, thank you so much. I definitely invite people to go and connect with you and really continue sharing your message, because the world needs it now more than ever.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was lovely having you.
I hope you like the interview. For me, as she was talking, there were so many like moments where I went, oh my gosh, okay, now I understand this. Now I understand that relationship. Now I understand that interaction. Now I understand why I behave this way. Now, this helps us realign and be more in alignment with who we are. So self-awareness is the beginning of everything. It's like in our businesses, I help clients do like we do a business audit. Where's the business at? That when we understand who we are, where we're at, that's when we can evolve. That's when we can step in to that next version. That's where we see that so much more is possible. So if you like this interview, please give it a thumbs up and share it. Help me share this message. Get more people on board with self-awareness, with executing on their own potential. And together, we bring this to a whole new level. So thank you for being here week after week, and I will see you next Tuesday.